I'm Dutch, and let's react to the Americans. Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is German, and I'm a typical Dutchman. And if you're wondering, if you're planning to come over to Europe, wondering how it looks over here, because you want to live here, or just for your holidays, then you're at the right channel, because in this channel we take a look at the differences of life and living in the United States versus life and living in Europe. And not specifically the differences, but how it is in America versus how it is in Europe. And today we're going to take a look at a video from a Brit in Germany. We're going to start with a subscribe and a like. And he's talking about what Americans don't understand about Europe. And that's an interesting one. So I want to know what it is, and maybe I can add or explain something if he doesn't explain it. I don't know how it's going to be. And if you like this kind of videos and reactions, then maybe you should consider to subscribe. We're still getting up to the first 1,000 subscribers. So if you have anything, then please hit the subscribe. It costs nothing. It's free. It's absolutely free. And it means the world to me. I have some burps. Okay, let's go and take a look what Americans don't understand about Europe.
What is it about Americans and Paris, or Americans and Tuscany, or most recently, apparently, Americans and Mallorca? Many Americans have long romanticized Europe as this jewel of ancient history and culture, but what even is Europe? What do people mean when they talk about it? Where is Poland? What about the Balkans? What about Turkey? Is that still Europe? And the question on everyone's lips, where does Russia fit into this? Isn't Russia also part of Europe as well? I'm originally from the UK. I've been living in Germany for over a decade, and these are some of the questions that I want to explore today, because if you ask 10 Americans to point to Central Europe on a map, you'll get 10 different answers. Most Americans, actually, I would say most people in general, like their mental map of Europe, at least people who are not from Europe themselves, it stops at France, Germany, and maybe Spain. Beyond that, it's just all this kind of vague blur of the East or Slavic or somewhere near Ukraine. And woe is the man who makes the mistake of calling a country Eastern Europe. Everyone seems to want to distance themselves from that label, because it's not just a comment on their geography. It's a kind of code for less developed, ex-communist, and many countries want out of that category. Poland sees itself as Central Europe, so does Hungary, Austria, and even parts of Germany. But where does Central Europe end, and where do the Balkans begin? And why does nobody seem to agree? You know, I guess the real question here is, how many Europes are there? It sounds simple enough.
There's only one Europe. There's only one America. There's only one Africa. So there's only one Europe. But I got bothered by a fly. Get over here. So I don't know. Let's take a look and dive into it. Many questions, interesting questions about what Americans think about. Yeah.
But it really isn't. You know, if you ask a geographer, they'll tell you Europe stretches from Iceland in the west to the Ural Mountains in Russia. That's kind of the textbook definition. You know, it's a subcontinent defined by tectonic plates and mountain ranges. But if you ask a politician, they'll probably say something about the EU, meaning the 27 countries with shared laws, open borders, and Brussels breathing down their neck. But then that excludes countries like Norway and Switzerland and Albania, and yes, even parts of the Balkans that desperately want into the EU. Now,
and nowadays even Great Britain. So
you ask somebody from the UK, you know, depending on their age, of course, you might hear something like fog in the Channel, or Europe is over there somewhere. Like, quite honestly, this video is much for Brits as it is for Americans, because many Brits do not see themselves as being part of Europe at all. And if you don't understand this, I did a whole video on it here. You can check it out after this one up here. I'll link it somewhere. So which one is it? Geographical Europe is seemingly clear on paper. Political Europe is in flux, and cultural Europe is completely up for debate. And that's even before we get to emotional Europe. You know, the one people imagine when they dream of sitting in a Parisian cafe, or eating Sachertorte in Vienna, or hiking the Alps, or sailing the Croatian coast, the one Hollywood romanticized for decades and that just doesn't really actually exist. There's no single definition of Europe. There really are quite a few, and some of them overlap.
Yeah, if you look in that way, yeah, all the different points of views about what Europe is, yeah, okay.
Contradict each other, and the confusion isn't just semantic. It shapes how nations see themselves and how others see them. And this is why countries like Georgia and Moldova and the Ukraine, they desperately want to be seen as European. And the complexity is increased by the sheer number of languages spoken here and the absence of any official common language across Europe. So, who belongs where? What is Western, Central, and Eastern Europe? This is
Western, Central, and Eastern Europe. Okay. The big rivers are usually the ones that separates, quote, quote, separates those parts. So the biggest one between Western and Central Europe is the Elbe, going all the way up from Germany, Cuxhaven, down to into Prague. Yeah, that's former divide between more or less Western and Eastern Europe.
This is where things really start to unravel. Like most Americans, quite frankly most Brits, they will refer to everything east of Germany as Eastern Europe, like Poland, Eastern Hungary, Eastern Romania, Bulgaria and the Baltics, definitely Eastern Europe. Except they're not. I mean, at least not according to the people who actually live there. Ask a Pole or a Czech or a Slovak where they live, and they will probably say Central Europe. And this is not just a geographic correction, it's a cultural statement. It's a way of saying we're not post-Soviet, we're not Balkan, we're not some eastern outpost of Europe, we're at its very heart. And this matters because, these labels, Western, Eastern and Central, are never neutral. They always come with baggage. Western Europe has long...
Yeah, it's when you live, quote, quote, in an Eastern Europe country, even for Western Europe, we go to East Europe for our holidays or something. Yeah, they have a label. I know, because most of the pre-war and just after the war, those were all part or linked to the USSR and communism and dictatorship, etc. So they try to get out of that image and to modernize and to, that's what they try to do. And they don't have yet all the funding to do this, but with help of Europe's and boosting up the tourism, etc., they can bring up, and then bit by bit, they're getting out of that image as being a Eastern Europe nation, while they are officially just part of the Central Europe. Yeah.
Been synonymous with prosperity, with liberal democracy and modernity. And Eastern Europe still evokes the ideals of communism. It is just the fact that these countries feel different. Like, even just walking around the city of Berlin, you can often feel the difference between West and former East Berlin, even though so much has changed since then. Central Europe tries to sidestep both stereotypes by reclaiming its medieval and Austro-Hungarian legacy, a legacy that predates the Cold War and often complicates the East-West binary even more. So what about the Balkans? Good luck getting a clear answer there. So geographically, the Balkans refer to the southeast.
Yeah. The Balkans. Greece, Turkey is popular tourist. Macedonia, Albania, Kosovo, Montenegro. Not much people go there for the holidays. Romania, I've been there myself twice. It's not that popular of a tourist destination. Moldova, I've never been, and I do not know if other people go to Moldova, because that is already connected to being Russia, being former Russia, being USSR, being etc. And they aren't. And matter of fact, this week they had elections and they chose for a new government who is pro-European, and that's already says that they are pro-European. And Putin did his best to interfere and to try to get Moldova back to the Russian side. So this is still a hard one. Romania is the next one that is in between those as being communism or not, but they had also for many, many years a dictator, Russian main dictator, and Romania is now more democratic, but they still miss a lot of money to evolve, to get a bigger economy, to boost up their productivity, etc. Because the dictator took all the money, and the rich are richer, and the poor were poorer. And now, Serbia, Montenegro, Bosnia and Herzegovina, they are out of a war region, so they are still, after all these years, finding a way to boost up. And then Croatia is a popular destination because there's on the Atlantic Sea, Adriatic Sea, warm weather, nice houses, cheap to go there together with Slovenia. So the Balkans,
Eastern Peninsula, countries like Serbia, Bosnia, Albania and Bulgaria. But culturally and politically it's a minefield. Like the term the Balkans was originally used by the Ottomans, which is the Turkish word for mountain, specifically like a chain of wooded mountains, and it was never really used by the locals themselves. And so for many in the West, the term Balkan often implies conflict, instability, ethnic tension, largely due because of the wars in the 90s. And so many people in the region.
Yeah, there were a lot of wars in those periods. That's what I just mentioned. Yeah.
They really resent this label. Identity there is really complex, and not least of all because the borders have shifted so often. Like, this is one of the things that makes comparing the US to Europe, as in US states, the European countries, totally meaningless, because it's just such a different situation. And then there is, of course, the question of Russia and Turkey, and this is not even about Americans or Brits anymore. No one can seem to come to a consensus on this. If you ask 10 Europeans if Russia is part of Europe, then you will probably get 10 different answers, each tinged with history, ideology, and their own kind of trauma.
Russia is part of Europe. And better said, a part of Russia is part of Europe, because not entire Russia is Europe, but a part of Russia is Europe. And beyond the big mountains of war is the Asian part of Russia. So Russia has a European side and an Asian side, which means that on the European side are the most and the biggest cities, and on the Asian side it's hardly any cities, and because of the cold and the bare lands, it's hard to live on the eastern part of Russia, on the Asian part, and
you just can't get a yes or no answer. It always requires context and story. Like, geographically, the answer is kind of a simple yes, but then again, not really, because only part of Russia, not the whole of it, is part of Europe. Only around 25% of Russia's landmass lies west of the Ural Mountains.
Yeah, and that's the European part, and the other one is the Asian part,
which traditionally marks the boundary between Europe and Asia, and that portion includes cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg. These are cities which culturally have played a huge role in European history. But politically and psychologically, the question is really anything but simple. You know, for much of modern history, Russia has been Europe's great contradiction, a civilization that gave the West Tolstoy, Tchaikovsky and Dostoevsky, while simultaneously terrifying it with Tsars, gulags and tanks. Russia has always occupied a liminal space. It's too vast, too authoritarian, and just too other to be fully European, yet too historically intertwined to be excluded. And so even in the post-Soviet years, its position remained ambiguous. Then came Crimea and the Donbass, and suddenly for much of the West, the question wasn't, is Russia part of Europe, but should it be? Today, many Europeans, especially those in the Baltics, Poland, and the Nordics, they reject any notion of a shared European identity with Russia. The war in Ukraine didn't just redraw borders.
Yeah, okay. You're starting with it. The war did a lot. It's not in the favor of the Russians that that Putin started the war 11 years ago against Crimea and now in Ukraine totally. Yeah, it's not in the favor. If this war, and let's hope that soon, this war will end, and then it will take decades to win back the trust of us Europeans into Russia as being going to Russia for holidays or doing trade with or something. Yeah, it's not in the favor, not at all.
It redrew Europe's moral map, and Russia, for many, now sits decisively outside of it. And then there's Turkey, another borderland nation caught between East and West, culturally rich, militarily strong, and historically enmeshed with Europe through the Ottoman Empire. And Turkey has long flirted with the idea of European belonging. It's even been a formal candidate for EU membership since 1999, still not been accepted, because as with Russia, the question is never just about geography, it's about values. It's about democracy, press freedom, human rights, and whether...
Yeah, that's it's the mixture of many religions systems within Turkey, and it's ethnicities that's keeping it hard to find a common goal that's good enough for the European Union to say, okay, get in, because they are regularly getting into Syria where they have nothing to do, but they went. And they went over to Cyprus also to claim half the island. So it's not the best idea to do this, so that's why. But yeah, they have a good culture. A lot of people go on their holiday to Turkey because it's good food, good weather, and it's not and it's cheap to go there. So yeah.
Turkey's political direction aligns with the EU's evolving identity. And so this is really the crux. Europe is not a neutral geographic concept. It's a story we tell about ourselves. And like all stories, it includes and excludes based on who's doing the telling. And so just to boil this down, I would say there are at least 3 different Europes, and most people kind of mix them up without realizing it, and that's why there's so much confusion. So there is geographical Europe, political Europe, and cultural Europe. So on paper, Europe is a continent, but it's a strange continent, more like a peninsula than a landmass attached to Asia and sharing the vast Eurasian land plate. And that's why definitions vary. Some exclude the Caucasus nations like Georgia and Armenia, others debate whether Cyprus, closer to Syria and Greece, should even count, and even the UK, like post-Brexit, is often spoken of as if it just drifted off into the North Atlantic. So geography alone is just not enough to explain Europe. It's not enough. You have to then go into political Europe, which is very confusing. There's the EU, which is the most ambitious political project the world has ever seen, but...
Yeah. There is a lot of pros and cons in each country's government. We should stay in the EU or leave the EU. It's always a part of discussion, yeah. But for now, I will say we have only benefits of EU versus the cons of the EU. Yeah.
Being in Europe doesn't mean being in the EU. Norway, Switzerland, and Iceland are not EU members, but they are unequivocally European, both in identity and alignment. Meanwhile, you have countries like Turkey and several Balkan states. They have been EU candidates for decades, but, they still haven't crossed the threshold into the EU.
Yeah.
Then you've got NATO, a separate alliance with its own geography. Turkey is in NATO, but not in the EU. Austria is in the EU, but not in NATO. Finland and Sweden recently joined. Ukraine wants to join. Russia is doing everything to prevent that from happening. So the politics get really very messy very quickly.
Yeah. I can understand that is for Americans who are not diving into this concept like he is. It's very confusing, yeah.
And political Europe is very different to geographical Europe. And finally, there's cultural Europe. Perhaps this is the hardest to define and the most emotionally charged. This is the Europe of Beethoven and Dante, of liberal democracy and secular values, of Christmas markets and university towns and high-speed trains. It's the imagined community that tourists dream of and politicians invoke. But it's also where the deepest tensions lie. Everyone talks about the US as being this amazing melting pot of multicultural immigration, which it's not false, but what about the cultural and political entity of Europe? Like, nothing like that has ever been tried in the history of the world. Like, the idea that you can just look past years and years of war and destruction and shifting borders, like, that actually goes against human nature, and that is what makes it so special. The problem is, who gets to define European values? Is it the bureaucrats in Brussels? Is it the Catholic heartlands of Poland, or is it the post-national elites in Paris and Berlin? When Hungary or Italy moves to restrict migration, are they defending Europe or are they betraying it? Is Europe Christian? Is it secular? Is it multicultural, postmodern? No one really agrees, but at least for the moment...
Yeah. Many discussions about it, yeah?
This is a battle of ideas, not bodies. And that was kind of the whole point of the EU. So if you are American, like, don't worry, you're not alone in finding Europe very confusing. It is just very difficult to define, and everything we've discussed here just makes it so elusive. Like, it's not a single civilization, but a palimpsest, like layer upon layer of contradiction. You've got Catholic and Protestant, Latin and Slavic, liberal and authoritarian. It's a place where boundaries have shifted so often that some villagers have changed countries several times without ever moving. And yet there is something distinctly European in the very awareness of these contradictions, like the ability to hold multiple identities in tension. The very idea that you can go supranational is very European. Like, no one else has even conceived of trying to attempt this. Like, we'll obviously see what happens if it actually works, but like, to sit in a cafe in Paris and critique the entire system in 5 languages with 3 passports in your back pocket, that...
Yeah. that you can say a lot about, but it's a melting pot of many 50 of many nations and many people with many languages, and still we are strong. There is no small bickering among the nations, but there is no war. There is no there's no war. The people walk in and out each country, flying in and out, driving, whatever, in and out each country without any problems. Nobody is discussing them. Nobody is attacking them. There is no one who has been discriminated. So it's all okay, and that's amazing. It's not many countries who are each other's neighbors are handling this way like they do, and that's not only 2 nations. No, we've got 27 in the EU. So
that is the very essence. The very idea of Europe is, and I think always has been, a debate. Like, that's what makes it so frustrating to outsiders and fascinates those who stay, because it's really alive and it's changing all the time. And so why does any of this matter, especially to someone from Austin or Alberta or Manchester? Why does this matter? Because the story of Europe is still the story of the West. It was European thinkers who exported ideas like rationalism, nationalism, capitalism. It was European wars that shaped the current world order that we have today. And it's European integration that set the template for post-war peace, and European disintegration that signals its potential unraveling. And so when Europe struggles with its identity, it reveals cracks in the broader Western psyche. And so Europe is often the first place where cultural tremors are felt. The rise of the far right, the backlash against globalism, the decline of religion, the loneliness epidemic, the bureaucratic bloat, these are not just European stories, they are canaries in the coal mine of modern liberal democracies. What happens in Sweden's elections, in Poland's courts, or on the French streets during a pension protest ripples far beyond the borders of Europe. And so, I have a tendency to go a little too deep with these topics, But if you're American, this might seem like overthinking, but in Europe, identity is largely inherited. It's not chosen. Like, we don't really have anything like the American dream. And whether you believe that the American dream is dead or alive, the fact that that idea exists is incredible. And so if you really want to understand Europe, you can't stop at croissants in Paris or castles in Bavaria. You really have to go deeper and ask deeper questions like, where do the Balkans begin and end? Why do some Poles bristle at being called Eastern European? What does it mean to be European in a world where global power is shifting to the East? And perhaps the most important question of all, can a continent built on division ever find unity without losing its soul? That's really the tension that defines Europe, and it's the
Oh, good questions. Yeah. For the ones of America who want to dive into the history of Europe, yeah, they have some things to do. There is a lot to learn. Yeah, it is.
reason why understanding it matters.
Because it's not 250 years history of the United States. We are in the year of 2025, so you have to go back a couple of thousand years.
Now more than ever before. If you're American or British or from anywhere else across the world, I highly encourage you to come and visit some European countries. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate all of you. Take it easy, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Interesting video about a lot of stuff he's trying to explain, and he's doing a good job by telling you there are different kinds of Europe. It's not what I expected as being there's only one Europe, but he's talking about the differences in political Europe, cultural Europe, geographical Europe, East, Central, and Western Europe, and yeah. In that case, there are a lot of Europes, but yeah, if you want to learn about it, he has some good ideas and some good tips to do so. Yeah, I liked the video. And if you did too, then press like button. And if you want to see more of my videos, then maybe this is a good place to start with. And it would really be a shame if you hit the subscribe button so we get up to the first 1,000 subscribers. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.